All right, welcome to Strength and Conditioning Exam 2 study guide. You should see the review guide that is on Blackboard being shared right now. So it starts there with know and understand the key terms throughout that chapter, or the chapters 7 through 11. So chapter 7 is age and sex differences. Chapter 8, the psychology of athletic performance. Chapter 9 and 10 is the nutrition, and chapter 11 is performance enhancing substances. So if you know all of those, you should be in a good place. So those bolded points that are in the glossary in the back of your textbook that you can look up if you're not sure. And then know the quizzes at the end of each chapter. There's 5 to 10 questions at the end of each chapter that you should be able to look at and answer. And the answers, again, are in the back of the textbook so that you can check yourself and make sure that you understand why those are the answers. Okay, not only why the correct answer is the correct answer, but know why the incorrect answers are incorrect. So you get a good understanding of the concept and not just memorize the information. I think I did pull a couple of those questions into the exam. So there you go, you get some free points there if you can know those answers. But again, if you understand the concept behind it, the information behind the question, you should be in a good place. With that, the homeworks, you should be able to go to Blackboard and look at your homeworks and get the questions and the answers there. Make sure that you understand the same thing, the concepts, understand it. So let's go through these. Chapter 7, where I'm going to pull questions from and things I want you to focus on is the changes and causes for youth body structure changes between male and female. And so what we'll really look at there, and it goes through a lot of different information, but obviously there's some hormonal changes that occur within the body, and that changes the prevalence of different things that we see as the adolescents mature. So with that hormone change, you get bone density changes. With estrogen increasing, we get stronger bones. And that actually goes down into some of the. Well, it's a great topic. Just read into those hormone changes. But what does that change into the injury prevalence? Okay, so if you have more injuries that are prone into different genders, what are those injuries that could occur as these adolescents mature into adulthood? How do we see changes of strength occur? That's that next point. Okay, we see those changes, especially if it's newcomer. It doesn't have to be a adolescent, but anyone that's brand new to strength training is going to see a large increase in strength within the first 4 to 6 weeks because they're neurally adaptating to the imposed demand. So they are learning how to control their body. They're learning how to coordinate and how to move through those movement paths. So that's that neuro. And when we talked in our psychology class, we talked about this myelination, about how you can even visualize and go through those movement patterns without actually performing them and still get better at them. That's a lot of what's happening here. As someone is new to training, they get a lot stronger, a lot quicker because they have the muscle mass to be strong. They just need to learn how to fire those neurons and create the movement that they want. Okay, so we'll see the improvements in strength. Bone and cartilage growth in youth compared to adults. Well, where does that growth occur? As we become adults, we seal our growth, and it no longer occurs. So where is the growth happening during adolescence? The epiphyseal, the joint surface, the insertion points along the bone. Read into that through your chapter and see where that growth is actually occurring, and then when it seals and stops actually having more growth, and you hit that full adult size in your skeleton. The female triad. So this looks at female athletes and their need for energy, their maturity and change through menstruation, and then because of the estrogen levels, their bone density. So it goes in a little bit into the injury, which we already mentioned a little bit with structure change between male and female. Okay, so if you look at that, and this happens often when females aren't eating enough, they aren't getting the right nutrition and training hard, is that we can see negative impacts on their menstruation. Okay, so look at that, because of it's to do with energy, it's to do with hormones and all the links that they have into the athletic performance. Okay, so we got to make sure we fuel the female body right. Different body types know what an ectomorph is, know what a mesomorph is, know what a endomorph is, know what shapes those body types are. If they're tall and skinny, what sort of athletes may come under that ectomorph type body type, what type of athletes may be more mesomorph, what type of athletes may be more endomorph, and kind of their shapes. Okay, so what you might see there. And then we've talked about the youth, we talked about a little bit into the adult, and now what about older adults? What do we see with older adults? And we normally generally see like atrophy. We start to see a decrease in physical stimulus. We see a decrease in energy expenditure. Therefore, we start to see any decrease in energy consumption because they don't expend as much, they don't get hungry, they don't use all that energy. So we eat less. With the less stimulus and less consumption, we see a sarcopenia, we see a decrease or an atrophy of muscle mass. So we start to see a decrease in size generally. Because of the less stimulus, less movement, maybe less nutrition, we start to see decreases in bone density too, that osteoporosis that's common in older adults because they're not moving as much and they're not putting stress on their bones, and their osteoblast activation or activity is decreased, and that's that bone strengthening or remodeling property that we have. Difference in strength across the cross-sectional area between males and females. There isn't one, okay? Providing you are the same amount of muscle mass, male or female will be the same potential to be strong. Okay, the difference comes with how big a muscle is. So generally males have more muscle mass than females, so they have a higher potential to be stronger. But also training. Okay, again, think about the neural drive. If someone trains over and over again with strength training, well, they're going to have a better recruitment of those muscle tissues. And so providing that they are equal there, it is to do with the size of the muscle that will give you greater strength. But like I said, if someone trains all the time, they can be lighter and stronger than someone else. So a female of equal weight can be stronger than a male of the same weight. It depends on their training and how they can activate that neural drive into the muscle and get that contraction. How many muscle fibers can they recruit and perform this movement? So chapter 8 goes into the psychology. Hopefully you enjoyed our guest speaker through the class. So first off, traits of anxiety or different types of anxiety. So there are 4 different types you'll see in your textbook. Make sure you know the difference between them. Okay, your state anxiety, depending on the experience that you're under, so maybe a high pressure situation. The trait society, which is more of a fear of a situation that gives you a response. Cognitive anxiety, where you think about the situation as fearful, or you become confused, or you can't concentrate. Again, cognitive, think more brain activation causing that. And then somatic is more of a think about your nervous system kind of taking over, and you have more of an emotional response. You sweat, you get dizzy, maybe dry mouth. You start to see these physiological changes in the body and from anxiety or nervousness for performance. Okay, so 4 different types. Make sure you know them, read over them, and be able to give an example of each, like maybe like I just did, so that you know, okay, if you got an example, you could identify which one that is. Pre-shot routines, of course, these help in performance. Okay, they help us get into a routine that can be replicated over and over again, kind of getting your movement pattern down. It goes a long way into performance. You see that throughout almost every sport at a high level, especially if it is a repetitive type of event, a free throw in a basketball shot. How many times you see that same bounce, bounce, spin, maybe bounce, bounce, shoot, or a golf swing or archery, or things that are repetitive in nature that do the same thing over and over again. Motivation and reinforcements. Okay, so again, reading through that textbook and understanding that there are positive and there are negative both punishments and reinforcements, okay? So if you give a positive reinforcement, you are giving a stimulus to increase the likelihood of the behavior. If you give a negative reinforcement, you take something away to increase the likelihood of a behavior. And same with the punishment. You can give a punishment. A positive punishment is to give something that decreases the likelihood of that behavior. And a negative punishment is you take something away that will decrease the likelihood of that behavior. So some examples, I give you a high five after you do a great exam performance. After exam 2, you're going to do great. I'm going to give you a high five. That is a positive reinforcement. Perhaps, if you did good at exam 2 and I said, okay, you don't have to do the 1.5-mile run, that would be a negative reinforcement, hopefully, that because you maybe don't want to do the 1.5-mile run that we do, I take that away, that is negative, and it increases your performance and say, okay, I'm going to do better in the next exam. What else might he want to take away that I dislike? So positive giving, negative taken away. Reinforcement would be to increase the likelihood, punishment to decrease the likelihood. Hopefully you get that understanding now. And then motivations, okay, are you intrinsically motivated? So does the reason that you're doing everything you do, that you train, that you work out, that you play your sport is because you love it? That's intrinsic. You do it for yourself because you enjoy the process. Or is it extrinsic? You're trying to achieve something. Are you trying to get a gold medal at the Olympics, a national championship? You're trying to achieve a status or an accomplishment. And that's extrinsic motivation. You're trying to achieve it for something, or maybe a coach is telling you to do it because you've got to get to this goal. That'd be extrinsic, okay? Intrinsic is going to be more successful. If you are self-motivated, you're going to be more consistent and see greater success there. So we try to get athletes to be on that intrinsic motivation rather than extrinsic for performance. Optimal arousal talks about the bell curve. You'll see through the chapter again that we have an optimal level of arousal. Too little and you're not going to be stimulated and focused enough to actually achieve a good performance, and too much will give you anxiety, thinking about everything that could go wrong as well as what could go right. So there's a bell curve that you want enough arousal to be high in performance and not too much, and that can skew, that bell curve can skew to the left or the right based on your skill level and the complexity of an activity. Something that you think is really easy, you're going to have less need to be stimulated or aroused because it's pretty easy for you. Okay, something that's a little bit more difficult, you may skew that to the right and see that you need to focus a little bit more, have a little bit more arousal. And the angles can change slightly, but depending on, like I said, your confidence level and the skill needed to perform that activity. If it's a high level of skill that you need to be thinking about lots of different things, or is it, I want you to throw trash in that trash can, and that's an easy thing to achieve. Okay, so arousal is based on activity and your level of confidence or ability to complete it. That goes into self-advocacy too, which comes under psychological techniques, which is next. Okay, your different psychological techniques that can be used. Again, that guest speaker that we had in for athletics talked about a different number of different psychological techniques that you can use. But self-efficacy is something that is your own belief in your ability to accomplish a task. Okay, so for athletes, we really want them to understand that they can accomplish this. If they don't have self-confidence, they won't have the self-efficacy to believe that they can achieve it, and their training won't be as optimum. Goal setting, make sure you know the acronym SMART with goal setting. So that's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-bound, that acronym. And know that goals can be short-term process goals, and they could be long-term outcome goals. So knowing the difference, and we have multiple of these maybe process goals to achieve a larger outcome goal. Often we think about the large outcome goal, say maybe winning a national title for college, and then we break it back down, okay, every couple of months or even weeks about, okay, how do I get to my point where I can be successful when it comes to this outcome large-term goal? So you break it down and you create stepping stones to the larger outcome. Okay, so that's goal setting. Chapter 9 and 10, nutrition. So there's a number of different things we want to cover here. Hopefully you will take my nutrition course and have a good head start on this. Protein quality and recommendations. Okay, so look at understanding different sources of protein. Okay, knowing, where meat, the amino acids that protein actually breaks down into, the essential, non-essential. We categorize those as complete or incomplete sources if they have all the essential amino acids. So if they have all the essential, they become complete. What's some sources that would be good, complete sources of protein? Now, all your animal proteins are going to be in that, your meats and your fishes, and even soy in some plants, but the majority of plants will be incomplete and they'll have not all the essential amino acids. So understanding those sources and maybe some good plant sources of protein and some good animal sources of protein. Know the registered daily recommendations, the recommended daily allowances, the RDAs. Okay, and even the AMDRs, the acceptable macro distribution range, which is how much of your diet should be protein. So the RDA for protein, 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So an athlete probably needs more than that. They can go all the way up to 2 grams per kilogram, but it will depend on their goals. Are they trying to gain weight, trying to gain muscle? Are they trying to lose weight, trying to maintain muscle but lose some body fat? When you're trying to change the body, you're putting under stress. So protein is something that's going to help you deal with that stress. So anytime there's change, whether it's gain or loss, we want to increase up to the 2 grams per kilogram. But otherwise, what the average recommend, or what the actual RDA is 0.8 grams. But probably going to be a little low for most athletes. Caloric value of your macros. Okay, there is some calculations in this. So as you come to class for your second exam, I will allow you to have a calculator. So be ready for that. Even maybe a piece of paper and a pen, so you can jot down some figures, because I will want you to be able to calculate some nutritional math. So the caloric value of our macros. So protein 4 calories per gram, carbohydrates 4 calories per gram, fat 9 calories per gram. And know how to calculate. If I said here's a food product that has 10 grams of fat, 15 grams of protein, 20 grams of carbohydrate, how many calories is that? You can add those up, times them by the caloric value of each, and get a total number of calories. Then you may be asked to, okay, well, what percentage of that total calories came from carbohydrate? Okay, so if it was 20 grams, then you had times it by 4 to get 80 calories. Okay, from the total amount of calories, how many calories came from carbohydrate? You do that math, figure out percentage, and know how to do those types of calculations. Different types of fat and its recommendations. So similar to sources of protein that we already mentioned, fat comes in different forms. Mainly stick with the triglycerides that we would talk about for athletic performance. They're the ones that fuel our energy systems for the most part. But different types. We have sources, just like we have protein. We can get fat from animal products. We can get fat from deep fried food. We can get fat from plants. So different sources where fat comes from. And what we'll see with the different sources is it's saturated, unsaturated, polyunsaturated. So thinking about those hydrogens that surround the carbon chain. And what are the consequences of consuming those types of fats? Some give you good energy. Some will have more link to heart diseases, metabolic diseases, atherosclerosis, things like that, because they're saturated, right? So the higher saturated have the negative health consequences for the majority of unhealthy population. If you are healthy, not as much of a worry with the saturated fats, but the majority of our population isn't very healthy. So saturated fats are recommended to keep on the low side and increase your unsaturated fat intake. The RDAs don't exist for fat other than your omega-3 and omega-6, which are your polyunsaturated anyway. So omega-3 and omega-6, make sure you know those RDAs, 12 and 17 grams a day, or 1.1, 1.6 grams a day for those. So look at those recommendations that are in your textbook. Make sure you know what they are. Impacts of carbohydrates on performance. Okay, know that carbohydrates have mainly one role in the body, and that is to give you energy, high intensity energy, and feed the central nervous system and the brain. Okay, so it's all about energy. Okay, so when it comes to performance, we have to load the body with carbohydrates to perform in a good manner. To really hit your potential, you have to have carbohydrates in your system, and that's why people do carbohydrate loading when they need to perform high. So understanding that, maybe understanding that the normal RDA for carbohydrates is 45 to 65% of your total caloric intake. The RDA is 130 grams because that's what the brain needs, but how much more can we actually take? What is the gram per kilogram recommendations for loading? And that can go all the way from 6 to 10 grams per kilogram, depending on the textbook that you're reading. Again, I teach the nutrition course, which comes from a different text than the strength and conditioning. The guidelines are slightly different. They can go up to 12 grams a kilogram, but for strength and conditioning, use 6 to 10 grams per kilogram for loading, and depending on the type of sport. When do we want them, and what type of carbohydrates? Well, we want low GI when we're preparing for activity, so that low GI means it metabolizes slowly, gets into the blood slowly, and is sustained in its energy resource to the body. And so we want that in preparation so that we can consume, load all our stores, our glycogen stores, be ready for this activity. Muscles have the energy. And then during, as we're using those stores, we want to be able to replenish them, and that's going to happen quickly. So we want the higher GI, the quicker, simpler sugars. So when you get to eat all your more favorable food that tastes good and sweet, is during and straight after, when we're trying to replenish and we're trying to get those carbohydrate stores back in. We'll see increased performance when we have more carbs. Doesn't really matter the type of performance, carbohydrate is going to increase its performance. So good stuff for energy there. The glycemic index I already kind of mentioned of carbohydrates within that, so high and low. Maybe you had to know some sources. I forget the exact questions I'm going to be asking on this exam, but you know, what's some really high glycemic index foods? That's your sweet stuff. That's the stuff that generally we recommend you stay away from. And what's your low GI foods? The stuff that is more sustained in its output, things that we recommend that you eat on a more daily basis, your multigrains, things like that. Fluid intake recommendations. So there is no RDA for hydrating with water, but there is an adequate intake of 1.7 liters for female, 2.7 liters for females, 3.7 liters for males per day. And so knowing that recommendation, and then how we can scale that for athletic performance. Okay, tracking your weight before and after exercise, understanding how much sweat that we've released, how much we need to rehydrate. So pretty much every 15 minutes, if you're in activity, maybe you're in a game day situation, a match, every 15 minutes, you want to be drinking, 3 to 8 ounces of water to keep you hydrated. Now, if that becomes a longer duration event, maybe multiple games, maybe it's a tournament, and you're playing for greater than 60 minutes, you probably are sweating profusely and you're losing your electrolytes, your sodium, your potassium, your chloride. So as that happens, now we need to think about, which the next point is your electrolyte balance. Okay, we don't want to dilute by only consuming water. And when we sweat, we don't just lose the H2O, but we lose our sodium, our potassium, our electrolytes. So we want to think about, okay, what sort of sport beverage can I consume that will allow me to rehydrate and get those minerals back into my system, because they're vital to performance. Sodium looks at fluid balance, and it looks like nerve impulse, along with potassium, that sodium potassium pump through the nerve action potential. And then chloride looks at your acetylcholine, so chloride into choline, and that's your neurotransmitter that stimulates muscle contraction. Okay, so make sure we have those so we can have good coordination and good muscle contraction. What are the deficiencies linked to performance? Well, we have national deficiencies that are on every food label that you consume. Okay, so your calcium, your iron, your vitamin D, and your potassium. Those are the 4 deficiencies. But which ones are more related to actually athletic performance? Iron's the big one. Making sure that we have enough iron. Remember, iron gives us our heme for our hemoglobin that carries our oxygen. And so in particular, for the longer duration, the aerobic energy production, we need to have that oxygen carrying capability to give oxygen to the mitochondria and in the electron transport chain so that we can have ATP production and energy long term. Eating disorders, just being aware that, that is a common thing for athletes, or not common, but it just a higher prevalence that can occur when they don't fully understand the role of nutrition in performance. So education's key there, that we understand that how much we should be eating and why we should be eating it. Specific sports generally will have larger prevalences of eating disorders, things that you have to cut weight for. So some sort of different martial arts have weight cuts, wrestling, things like that. What does actually occur? Gymnastics, really want to have a high relative strength. So in order to get that relative strength really high, people try to minimize their weight, and therefore they become lighter, and maybe it's easier to do some gymnastic type events. So just being aware of that, the different eating disorders that there are, anxiety, and then different vitamin categories and even minerals. I mean, know both. You got your water soluble and your fat soluble vitamins. And so the easy way to remember this is there's only 4 fat soluble vitamins: A, D, E, and K. If you memorize those, if it's not those, it has to be water soluble. Your B vitamins, your C vitamins, things like that. Also know the mineral side of that too. You've got trace and you've got major minerals. Whether you need greater than or less than 100 milligrams a day puts them into that category. And those are minerals. Okay, so knowing those for nutrition. And the last one is your performance enhancing substances, at least the ones that have a little bit more science backing. There's tons of supplements out there that claim to do many different things that help you perform. But what are ones that have a lot of actual backing in the literature, in the research? So we get all these listed here. Well, creatine is one of the most researched and documented performance enhancers there is. We get this normally from meat. It's stored in the muscle mass of animals as well as humans. And so that's where it stores in you. So as you consume creatine or you consume meat, you will get creatine into your system, but you can supplement that. It's just a white powder. And that helps your phosphagen system. When we phosphorylate ADP back to ATP and create energy within the phosphagen system, this immediate, rapid, explosive strength energy system, we need creatine to do that. So we can consume creatine monohydrate, all the different derivatives that they sell, to get that creatine available to us and buffer that energy system and get a couple maybe more reps in training, or a little bit more endurance in just the explosive short-term strength. Next I have listed there is beta-alanine. This one is known pretty well because of its side effect of paresthesia, which is that tingling sensation that you get when you consume it. This is in a lot of pre-workouts, and rightfully so. It has a great amount of data that proves that it works in buffering acid out of the muscle cell that causes your fatigue and basically acute burn, that burn, that pump when you're really trying hard and muscles start to fatigue. That's the acid buildup that's occurring because of the hydrogen ions that are a byproduct of muscle contraction, and making the environment more acidic. Beta-alanine is an alkaline that shuttles those out of the system so that you can do a little bit more work. So you see a little bit more endurance with beta-alanine, but you have to get to that intensity. You have to get to that burn for it to work. So maybe some athletes, some users don't always get that high to actually utilize it, but yeah, it works if you can get there. And then think about, okay, what type of athletes would want to use these things? The creatine is more of a strength type athlete, anaerobic and phosphagen system. It's not going to be something that helps aerobic athletes very much. Beta-alanine depends on the intensity. It's going to help both, really, because whenever you do an aerobic energy, then normally maybe you have a sprint finish or something along those lines that will get you to that intensity. but you're going to see more of a use in the anaerobic system, more of your weight training, more of your explosive strength, maybe your 400-meter sprint, your 100-meter sprint, linked to your 800-meter sprint, where you're getting that fatigue and exhaustion. Nitric oxide, mainly use the amino acid arginine that converts to nitric oxide inside the muscle for this, but it's vasodilating properties. So there's a Nobel Prize winner, nitric oxide, understanding that it dilates blood vessels. So providing your fueling because of the nutrition chapter really well, and maybe even some of these supplements, you've got to get them to the muscle, and that goes through the blood. And so if you can dilate the blood vessels and increase blood supply to those areas, you're going to have better performance. So a vasodilator can be useful. You can get those from foods too, though. Your beets, beetroot, or beets known here, are great with the nitrates that are in that. That's basically what nitric oxide is allowing you to dilate those blood vessels. Will decrease blood pressure, so it could be a concern there on side effects. Read about those. Branched chain amino acids, so also just as a general thing, protein, okay, whey protein or plant protein, whatever source of protein is going to be advantageous to provide protein synthesis and stimulate growth in muscle tissue, cell repair, recovery, turnover. But in particular, the branched chain amino acids, valine, isoleucine, those three have a different role within the muscle cell to providing energy. So potentially when you are starved slightly or you're underfed with carbohydrate, the body's going to rely on protein a little bit more for energy production. And protein or amino acids that are used for that have to be shuttled to the liver to undergo gluconeogenesis to actually produce glucose, and then shuttle back to allow basic glycolysis or slower glycolysis to occur and actually produce energy. But these branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine, they don't have to go to the liver to undergo through this process. So out of the 20 different amino acids, these are the only 3 that can be used for energy inside the muscle cell itself. So they can be quite advantageous to use during workouts or throughout the day, really. You take those, but intra-workout BCA is pretty commonly used. And these are all legal substances for athletes, but again, always when you talk about supplements, you should always check your banned substance list. Make sure that your supplements are third-party tested, they're trusted in sport, they're consumer labs tested, third-party tested. Caffeine, probably the most taken stimulant there is out there. I'm sure everyone already knows the effects of caffeine, but it's an adenosine inhibitor, which means that we decrease fatigue when we take caffeine. It's known as a stimulant, but really it's just an inhibitor of fatigue. And so as adenosine builds up in the body, we get tired. Caffeine blocks that transmit across the blood-brain barrier, and so you don't get tired with caffeine as easily. Okay, still happens, but just blocks it depending on the strength and the amount of caffeine you consume. We do see increases of performance in caffeine, more to do with the aerobic side. So this is the endurance athletes are going to see greater benefit from caffeine than the anaerobic athletes, more explosive strength type athletes. L-carnitine listed there. L-carnitine has a role in fat transport. So again, we're going to see a greater use of fatty acids for fuel with L-carnitine and less of the glycogen. Can be useful for trying to change weight, can be useful for aerobic energy production using fatty acids as fuel. Not going to see too much increase in performance, I don't think, with this supplement, but it can help you in its change of body composition, which will enhance your performance. So yeah, helps with fat transport and fat metabolism and oxidation in the aerobic energy production. And then thedropiridine is used more with your aerobic athletes, again, this works on your red blood cell count. So this helps to increase blood cells, which carry oxygen, okay, which allow your aerobic metabolism. So these are going to be seen in more of your endurance marathon, Ironman, triathlete type events that are going to increase performance there. Some of the negatives with that, because of increasing red blood cell count, you're actually thickening the blood. That means you're going to have higher blood pressure and therefore more maybe artery disease or artery damage, peripheral damage. And that leads to then the likelihood that saturated fat, going back to the nutrition side, could block those arteries and those damaged sites. So think about a river as it flows, water flowing through a river. When pressure is higher, the banks get curved more, we get more erosion happening. The same thing happens in your blood vessels. Higher blood pressure is not good on your blood vessels and creates damage. When that damage occurs, that's when the body tries to start to heal itself. And that's actually the issue of atherosclerosis, is that block the covering of the damaged cells that creates plaque buildup. And then that plaque buildup can protect it for a while, but then when that falls off, goes down to a smaller vessel, blocks it completely, and heart attack or stroke can occur. So you've got to be careful with increasing blood thickness. Can increase performance short term, but you've got to be careful on how much that goes. And that's a common issue with steroid use with the aerobic population in performance. Wow, I went through that really quickly. That's 40 minutes, maybe 30, 40 minutes. I'll stop the screen share. I have time for questions. Let me look at the comments, see if we've got anything here. I did blast through that really quickly. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording so this can go onto my YouTube if you want to find it there and you're not able to hit right now.